G'day guys, I'm Mini War Painter and I've just got one question for you. Do you want to learn how to paint epic true metallic golds? If the answer is yes, then I'll catch you after the intro. This tutorial is going to be a start to finish video on how I paint the disc of Tzeentch, covering things that are the blue and yellow stripes, the gold details and the gems that are underneath the disc. However, one thing I won't be covering in this tutorial is how I painted the red mysterious smoke underneath the disc. This tutorial will be held exclusively for my Patreons, so if you're a super duper keen painter and you want to learn how to paint the red mysterious smoke, then click on the link in the description box below and this will take you to my Patreon account. This tutorial shouldn't be too hard to follow, as it all involves layering, shading and edge highlighting. However, there will be the opportunity to do a little bit of glazing, so if you haven't tried it before, now's a chance to give it a go. Now let's get on with some painting. So my whole thought process on how to paint this model was, first of all, it had to be dominated by gold. Exalted sorcerers are complemented with gold trinkets and details. My understanding is that the more gold a sorcerer has on him, the more higher he is in the rank structure. Therefore, it must take a very noble and high profiled individual to be given the ability to zip around the battlefield on a pointy golden hoverboard. So to begin painting these details, I used Rhinox hide to base the darkest sections of the disc, which is right underneath it. With hardly any light being able to reach this part of the disc, it's not going to have many reflective effects, which is why I'm basing this with the lowest gold tone on the market. Next, I'll get a larger brush and begin basing the rest of the disc with Scale 75 Negro Gold. If you're unfamiliar with the Scale 75 paint range, I advise you to check them out. They're fantastic in tones and pigment, giving them a strong coverage. Next, I'm going to dry brush the details underneath that I based Rhinox hide with Negro Gold. Because there's so much embossed detail under the disc, dry brushing is the most efficient approach because no one is ever going to see the details under the disc. After this, it's time to shade all the recesses with Rhinox hide. I prefer to use Rhinox hide over Agrex Earthshade because with slightly watered down paint you can get far better control over the wash, leaving less mess to tidy up later. With all those details finished, it's time to move on to highlights. To get the best gold effects, I choose to divide the disc into quarters and applied highlights to opposite ends and further shading to what was left. You'll see what I mean. I begin first with a 1-to-1 mix of Negro Gold and Kunzite Alchemy. The purple tones of Kunzite Alchemy help to add an enchanted feeling to the gold. Like I explained earlier, I'll begin to highlight the disc at opposite ends to represent how light reflects off a round surface. Notice the direction I'm brushing the pigment towards the centre of the highlight where I wish it to be the strongest. I'll also apply this highlight around the rim of the disc, as well as slightly underneath. As these next steps develop, you'll get a better understanding to what I meant with breaking the top of the disc down into quarters. I'm now going to add some Citrine Alchemy into my previous mix to help lead our highlights into the direction we want them to go. And I'll begin applying this to the same areas I highlighted before, but making sure to leave some of the previous highlights showing on the outer edges. Notice the further I go out to the edges of the disc, the area I highlight gets wider, and along the rim of the disc, dragging the pigment to the centre. Now we've established some highlights, next step is to develop some dark reflections to the alternate quarters of the disc. This will help to make the highlights we've made so far appear brighter. To start with, I'll use a 1:1 mix of Rhinox hide and Negro gold, and begin the same process I carried out with the highlights, only this time we'll be getting darker in tone. With these darker tones, you'll get a better result if you thin these down more than usual to help turn them into a glaze consistency. By keeping them thin, we'll be able to apply the same tone again in the next stage, but treat it as a next tone darker, because by applying a second layer, we'll be reinforcing the opacity of the area we covered, making things darker without going pure Rhinox hide and losing out on metallic properties. So I'm now going to develop the shading further with the same mix, but this time focusing the pigment more to the centre of each surface, leaving some of my previous efforts still showing. By doing this, I'm making the centre of the shade darker still, just by reinforcing the opacity of the previous tone. With those gold surfaces established, I'm now going to go back to my Negro Gold and Kunzite Alchemy mix and apply an edge highlight to all the edges facing outwards. This is because light will most likely catch on these edges than the ones facing inside towards the sorcerer. To finish off the gold, I'll apply a final spot highlight with Citron Alchemy to the centre of each reflection to help intensify the shine. But word of caution, apply this stage sparingly. Too much and you'll ruin your hard work. And that's the gold completed. After all those steps, we're left with a great polished effect, worthy of a sorcerer powerful enough that Tzeentch himself deems him exceptional. But now to add in the rest of the details. I'll start things off with the silver metallics, which I'll base with heavy metal, but only to the sections that are adjacent to the lighter gold toned reflections. By treating the silver metallics the same way as the golds, it will help to promote the reflective effect we're after. This includes to how we paint the blades on the outside as well. Here you can see I've only based the relevant size of the blades corresponding with the lighter reflected segments of the disc. The other sections we've yet to base that lie in the darker segments of the disc are to be based with thrashed metal. If you look now, you can see the subtle differences in the silver tones. The next step is to wash all these areas with Druchii Violet. This will help to add to the enchanted appearance we're after, that will reinforce the statement that this is a disc of Tzeentch. When applying this wash though, don't allow it to pool up excessively at any point, so be sure to soak up any puddles that form to prevent this from happening, otherwise this will overpower the subtle effect we're after. Once this is fully dried, it's time to break out your finest tipped paintbrush as we now dive into some edge highlighting.
Everything you know is in your mind.
We'll start things off with black metal, which we'll use to highlight the darkest portions of the silver metallics that correspond with the darkest segments of the gold. This includes the areas of the blade that won't catch a lot of light. Then we'll move up to thrash metal, which we'll use to highlight further along the silver sections we've just highlighted, to develop the way that the reflections get lighter as the texture fans out.
Are you all my personal?
Next, we move on to heavy metal, which is used to highlight the outer portions of the segments that correspond to the lighter aspects of the disc. Then finally finishing off this gradual process with speed metal, used to highlight the inner details of the silver metallic areas. To finish the blades, I now add a spot highlight of white alchemy to the tippy-most tops of each blade. With the silver metallics now finished, we've added contrast in temperature as we have the cold silver metallic steel integrated with the warm shiny golds, which help with making the model far more interesting to look at, as opposed to just leaving those areas painted gold. With Thousand Suns Blue, I'll use this to base the blue embossed stripes on top of and around underneath the disc. This is then followed by basing every other stripe with Avalon Sunset. Adding these details rather than leaving them gold helps to add further interest to the model, and secondly ties the disc in more with the remaining army of Rubric Marines that will be following this disc and its lustrous rider into combat. Once dried, I'll then layer over the Avalon Sunset efforts with Uriel Yellow. Why not just base it with Uriel Yellow, you ask? The answer of course is I'm scared to. Once completed, we'll move on to edge highlighting the blues with Ahriman Blue, making the effort to highlight all around the embossed details, but without covering all of our base tone. Then we'll highlight the yellows with Pallid Witch Flesh. But if yours has dried up like mine, just mix together some Screaming Skull and White Scar, and you won't be far off. I apply this highlight to the edges of the embossed stripes facing outwards from the centre of the disc. I'll make the same efforts again with Baharov Blue, aiming to highlight the edges facing towards from the centre of the disc. With the stripes finished, all there's left to paint is the gems that circle underneath the disc. I'll begin these by basing them with Caliban green. Next, I'll glaze in a highlight of Warpstone Glow, but just to confuse you, I'll put in a large picture of Cyberite green. Remember to draw the pigment to the top corner of the gem. Now we'll glaze in a highlight of Cyberite green, reducing the amount we glaze on the gem every time. Here you can see how thin I make my glazes. All I'm doing is trying to drop a tiny puddle of pigment into the top corner of the gem. Then we'll use Ghost Blaster Green to take the highlight further, remembering to reduce the area we cover every time we take the highlight to the next level. Then finally a spot highlight of a 1:1 mix of Ghost Blaster Green and White Scar, being super careful to aim this at the top corner where it appears that the reflection in the gem begins. Then to wrap up the process of painting the gems, I'll give them all a coat of Lahmian Medium, which will help give the whole gem a smooth finish, and ties in all the tiny transitions we've just made. And that's the model complete. I'll leave you now to enjoy the end result, and I'll catch you again at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really hope you found this video useful. If you want to learn how to paint the red smoke underneath, then click on the link in the description box below, and this will take you to my Patreon account, which you'll be met by me again in a short little video where I'll show you everything you've got to look forward to should you wish to join. Other than that, you've got me on Instagram at miniwar_painter. Over there I'm continuously posting, so you'll be kept up to date continuously on what I'm up to and what I'm painting. Thanks for watching guys, and don't be shy to mix those paints. Ta-ra!